Hello, this is Mark Zabatella from Outside Shore Music, home of mastering MuseScore. In this week's tip, I want to show you how you can invert a melody. By that I mean take a melody and run it basically upside down. So the ascending passages are now descending and vice versa. As an example, here's a melody. It goes up and then comes down. An inversion of that melody would be one that goes down and then comes up. That's what an inversion is. And this is a technique that's often used as a way of developing a theme. In particular, like in a Baroque fugue, you'll often see whatever the subject is, at some point in the development section, that same subject might appear in inverted form. So MuseScore can do this for you in a couple different ways, and so I'm going to show you how this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to need a plugin called Mirror Intervals. This plugin comes pre-installed with MuseScore. You just need to enable it. So I'm going to go to Plugins, Manage Plugins, and it's going to list all the plugins. I have quite a few here listed because I've installed some that weren't there by default, but Mirror Intervals is there by default. So you would select it from that list, and then over here, right next to where my face is, hello, you can click Enable. And now it will show up in the list of enabled plugins. If you've never used a plugin before, that'll be the only one there on the list. So now that it's enabled, you only have to do that once. You only have to do that once, and then it's enabled forever. If I now select this passage in my score and go to the plugins menu, I'm going to find that Mirror Intervals plugin listed under Composing and Arranging Tools. And if I've selected the passage I want to invert, and when I run the Mirror Intervals plugin, it pops up a dialog and asks me what is the pivot point. The pivot point means, well, what are we reflecting? If we think of this as mirroring, what are we reflecting around? In my example here, I reflected around C. C stayed C, right? Then we went up from there, and then this one came down. I'm going to show you in a minute what it would look like to choose something other than C as our pivot. But I'm going to go ahead and choose C and then hit Apply. Now, when I do that, you'll see, indeed, I have a melody starting on C, and it goes down, and then it comes back up. So it does what I had done, but it's different, right? The version I had stayed in the key. The version that the Mirror Intervals plugin does is not staying in the key, and that's because it is trying to preserve the quality of the intervals. Let me undo that for a moment. You'll see that the original went whole step, half step, whole step. That's because it's basically a major scale. And if I now redo it, you'll see that the inverted version is also whole step, half step, whole step. Right? So the inverted version is keeping the same qualities of intervals, but in so doing it needed some accidentals. Now sometimes that's exactly what you want. Sometimes though you just want to stay within the key. You want to invert the intervals but change their quality to stay within the key. So the way to do that is after running the plugin, you can select this passage, and then we're going to use a little trick that is a good accidental removing trick. There's probably more than one way of doing this, but here's how I like to do it. I'm going to use Alt-Shift-Down. Alt-Shift-Down transposes a passage down, but does so diatonically. It does so eliminating accidentals. It keeps everything within the key. So Alt-Shift-Down moves everything down a step. Now it starts on B, but you see my accidentals are gone. And now when I hit Alt-Shift-Up, now I'm where I wanted to be. I have my inverted line starting on C. So that is how you can make that type of inversion, one that's diatonic, by using Alt-Shift-Up and Alt-Shift-Down. You can either go down then up, or you can go up then down, doesn't really matter. Let's talk about that pivot point before I leave you here. I'm going to undo these changes here, and let's talk about what would happen if I chose a different pivot point. This time I'm going to choose E as my pivot point, and you're going to see why in a second. I select this passage and I come to the Composing Arranging Tools, Mirror Intervals, and I'm going to pick E as my pivot point, hit apply. Again, I've got lots of accidentals, which are kind of confusing the situation. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Alt-Shift up and then Alt-Shift down. And now you can see what's happened here. E stayed E. Remember, the original melody was C, D, E. Now it's G, F, E. It was ascending C, D, E, and now it's descending G, F, E. I don't know if I'm in the right key or not, but you get the idea. It's reflected around the E. The E has stayed the same and everything else has changed. And this is actually a pretty common technique to invert around scale degree 3, because what it does, again, if I undo that, well, undo all those changes, you'll see that this line, my original line, kind of outlined a C major scale, ba-da-da-da-dum, the first 5 notes of a C major scale. Well, my inverted version also, ba-da-da-da-dum, is the first 5 notes of a C major scale. So by inverting around scale degree 3, it kind of preserves that. That's a little music theory thing for you there. There's a lot more to it. You can learn in my counterpoint course if you like. But in any case, I'm just here to show you that mirror intervals plugin. That is how it works. And now you can use it to invert any old melody you like.